Imu-sama's identity and the national treasure of Marijua have been some of the biggest mysteries in all of One Piece, but the truth is that if you were a Japanese reader, you'd have already solved a big part of this mystery that is largely unknown to the English fandom, as some key details lost in translation that most English readers have missed on show that Oda has already revealed the true power of what is the national treasure of Marijua, the hidden truth about Imu-sama's identity, and part of Imu's grander plan for the end of the story. What I'm about to tell you may completely reframe the way you see Imu and the world government forever, so allow me to explain it properly for you. So the national treasure of Marijua was a concept that was introduced by Doflamingo back in Dressrosa and was later brought back in chapter 906 during the Reverie when Imu-sama revealed to us the Straw Hat and Marijua. This led many people to obviously think that the large Straw Hat is the national treasure, but the Japanese version actually tells us that this is not true at all, and the reason for it is proven in Doflamingo's very own words, so allow me to translate them one by one in the most literal way possible. When Doflamingo plans to execute law in chapter 761, I'll ask him for one final answer, as he doesn't understand how a fallen celestial dragon like Doflamingo could possibly mobilize CP0 to fake his abdication from the Shichibukai. After all, CP0 only respond to the celestial dragons, including the Gorosei among them, so a fallen one shouldn't hold the power anymore. However, Doflamingo explains that this is because he knows about a national treasure of grave significance that resides within Marijua. Specifically in Japanese, it's written as Kokho, using the kanji for country and treasure, meaning national treasure, which by dictionary definition refers to an item or person that is emblematic of a nation's cultural heritage or identity. It is also further described as Judai, or something of crucial grave significance, or in our words, as Doflamingo himself puts it, a treasure whose very existence would shake the world to its core, meaning that whatever this treasure is, if it came to be known, the knowledge of its existence alone would send ripples across the world. This is the reason why Doflamingo was able to blackmail CP0, as it is inferred. It's also the reason why they allowed him to become a Shichibukai and take the throne at Dressrosa, because if he ever divulged such knowledge, it could pose a threat to how the government runs to its very core. They tried their best to kill Doflamingo at all costs, but once he landed himself a position of power within the underworld, he was able to make a great use of this information to blackmail them. But then, if the national treasure of Marijua is just a straw hat, how could it possibly shake the world to its core? I mean, sure, maybe it has void-centered significance such as being the original Joyboy's hat, but the world likely wouldn't know that. Well, how about then we reframe the entire scene, because in chapter 906, Doflamingo rightfully mentions that he believes assassins from above are likely being sent after him to kill him in Impel Down, these almost certainly being CP0 agents trying to silence him so that he doesn't divulge the information of the national treasure. And then comes the scene when we are introduced to the Straw Hat, which contextually would infer it is the national treasure. But see, that's the thing, because in Japanese, and technically in English as well, Kokuho, or national treasure, does not refer to just a physical item. A national treasure can be both an artifact but also a living person, something that is emblematic of a country's national heritage. Meaning that the national treasure is not the Straw Hat, but actually King Imu. Imu-sama is the living national treasure of Marijua, someone who, if their existence ever came to light in the world, would crumble the very image of the world government, which is why they have taken such important efforts towards making sure that their identity never comes to light. And Doflamingo, who came to know of Imu-sama's existence, was able to blackmail the celestial dragons to such an extent as to ruin an entire country in exchange for never divulging Imu's existence. Considering how easily they were willing to dispose of Lelouch, it's no surprise they were willing to sacrifice Dressrosa for the sake of this secret as well. And if this still doesn't convince you, then Doflamingo's following line confirms this beyond any doubt, because as he claims in his own words, if on that day, which refers to the day when Corazon died, I had been able to seize within my grasp the abilities of your Ope Ope fruit, I could have used them with the national treasure of Marijua, allowing me to take hold of the reins actually controlling the world. This line is often misunderstood as Doflamingo stating that to attain control of the world, he needed both the Ope Ope no Mi and the national treasure of Marijua, but what the Japanese version adds to that is that it's inferred he actually planned to combine them together. But how would he do that? Well, that becomes very obvious once you actually read into his following line, which many have largely ignored, but it explains this whole mystery. Getting to that point, or in other words, using the Ope Ope fruit on the national treasure of Marijua is why your powers hold such essential value in application, because they allow for the personality switching operation. He then goes on to talk about the Perennial Youth operation, which we'll get to later, but that's just Oda trying to distract you from the main point here. Doflamingo says that the primary reason he wanted the powers of the Ope Ope no Mi was because he wanted to use the personality switching operation on the national treasure itself. This operation refers to that silly gag from Punk Hazard when the Straw Hats had their personalities switch around, which back then came off as just a fun little gag to help spice things up in that arc, but suddenly now it becomes really clear how it was the most vital step in Doflamingo's master plan. Because had he attained the powers of the Ope Ope fruit for one of his loyal subordinates, then he could have used them on King Imu to switch both of their personalities, essentially allowing Doflamingo, much like Sanji or Nami did in Punk Hazard for example, to translate himself into Imu's body. And if he managed to pull this off the right way without being found out, then the Gorosei and the Celestial Dragons would obey him without a doubt, allowing Doflamingo, just as he put it, to take hold of the reins actually controlling the world, or quite literally in Japanese, to take hold of the true power that rules this world, becoming the king of the world, taking the position of the national treasure of Marijua, King Imu-sama. This makes it almost completely certain that the national treasure of Marijua specifically refers to Imu-sama directly, and that might give a few extra hints about their own identity and secrets. A living national treasure specifically refers to someone who possesses such knowledge or talents that make them emblematic of the culture and identity of their nation, in this case the world government or Marijua, the personification of the world government itself. Furthermore, as Doflamingo describes within this context, he elaborates upon how, on top of the personality switching operation, the Ope Ope fruit allows for the Perennial Youth surgery. In fact, he even refers to it as the dream that mankind has had since ancient times, which now knowing more about the true nature of Dal fruits suddenly starts to explain a lot of things, as we know that the creation of Dal fruits was driven by the dreams and hopes of people, so the dream of Perennial Youth eventually led to the creation of the Ope Ope fruit. It's important to note, as people often make this mistake, that Perennial Youth refers to never aging or becoming old, not necessarily becoming immortal, as there's a big difference between the two. In Japanese specifically, the wording for Perennial Youth literally uses the kanji for never elder or never aging, so be careful of any mistranslations. Perennial Youth just means that your body doesn't age and that you can't die of old age, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are immune to dying from other causes such as being killed, which is what is supposedly being implied here. However, since Doflamingo uses this in the context of the national treasure of Marijua, then it strongly means that the national treasure has also underwent the Perennial Youth surgery, which would potentially reveal that King Imu is an eternally youthful being, or in other words, someone who has been alive for a very long time, potentially even since as early as the Void Century. And you see, recently it was revealed that the Gorosei, or in Japanese the 5 Elder Planets, are named after the 5 Elder Planets of the Solar System, such as Saturn, which is the reason why they all revolved around Imu, who within this case embody the Earth. All the planets are named after Greek gods, and Earth is named after Gaia, the goddess of the Earth, also known as the Mother of Nature, whose One Piece counterpart would be the Mother of Nature, the Sea, or Umi in Japanese. So with the implication that Imu-sama may very well actually be Umi, also known as the Mother of Nature, the Sea, then once again this gives us another puzzle piece of tying together their very existence and identity. But you see, this actually goes a lot deeper, as it means that Doflamingo's true intentions all along were to take Imu's place. Much like someone like Roxy Jabak, Doflamingo's ambition was to become the king of the world, who fittingly enough, much like Leloucha, the island where Jabak was on was erased in an instant. We've seen how Doflamingo has a god complex, wishing to stand above all others, but interestingly, he is also referred to as the Ten Yaksha, which is often translated as the heavenly demon, though you could also translate it much more literally as the celestial devil, or simply the god devil. And this makes a lot of sense because Doflamingo is a celestial dragon, or a god who became a devil, and the same can be said about Imu-sama, who is both a god and a devil. We know that during the Void Century, the kings that formed the world government were referred to as devils, and in some accounts and myths there is also mention of the Devil of the Sea, which could potentially refer to Umi as well, making her the great devil king of the Void Century, who has survived all the way to the present thanks to the Perennial Youth surgery as the king of the world. which, coincidentally enough, we also saw that the Devil King had the exact same laser power to obliterate a kingdom overnight, just like Imu. Coincidence? On the flip side, the allies of Joy Boy were also known as the gods of the god country, but when the government won, history was rewritten and the devils became the new gods who formed the new world, and the gods of ancient times came to instead be known as the clan of devils, the natural enemies of the gods, which would make them the natural enemies of the celestial dragons, or, if you take these words much more literally, the enemies of nature, the enemies of the god, Mother Nature herself. So similarly, Doflamingo, who was robbed from power and treated like a devil, wanted to ascend to become like God, the king of the world. Doflamingo began to treat Dressrosa like his own little world government, quite literally erasing those he deemed unnecessary from being remembered by others, as after all, people only die when they are forgotten, rewriting the history of Dressrosa by framing himself as the good king that all people respected, and then leading a purge against the world. And if we take a simple look at how his subordinates treated him, the parallels between Doflamingo and Imu become so clearly apparent, with the scene where the Don Quixote family kneeled to him being identical to that of the Gorosei kneeling to Imu. But even further, the Don Quixote family continuously referred to Doflamingo as someone with the qualities of becoming king, a king whose will no one can defy, saying that one day he would become the king of the sea, quite literally the position currently held by the sea itself, King Imu, the national treasure who Doflamingo wanted to become. And this connection becomes fairly apparent in a very specific small detail. You see, as it was mentioned, it appears that it is tradition among celestial dragons to shoot their victims a total of 16 times, as this number bears symbolic significance. Doflamingo similarly infused 16 bullets into his god thread attack, or as it reads in Japanese, Jurokupatsu no Senaru Kyodan, which means the 16 shots of the assassin who became God, with the kanji for god thread reading as execution of God. And this is very fitting because when Imu-sama destroyed the Lelouch kingdom, they specifically used a total of 16 bullets to erase it from existence. This number has become as such symbolic that other celestial dragons would execute others with the tradition of using 16 shots, as similarly Doflamingo would use 16 bullets for his execution of God. The interesting implication of this is the fact that Doflamingo implies that the other celestial dragons knew about Imu-sama's existence as well, which is the reason they wanted him dead and is likely the reason why he came to know as well. You may think it is odd that they may know, but Rocinante mentioned how celestial dragons know about the D clan, otherwise forgotten everyone else in the world, so it makes sense they were privy to at least some vague details. Even Akainu seemed somewhat aware of Imu-sama's general existence when speaking to the Gorosei, even if he was asked not to pry into it, but the implication is that anyone who even thought of divulging such a secret wouldn't live long to tell the tale. In fact, beyond Sabo, it's possible that both Vivi and Wapol may have found out about this truth. In chapter 956, Wapol was said to have special intel for Morgans in exchange for hiding, what he claimed would have the government wanting to erase them if they found out. So it makes sense that if Imu-sama is the one that actually killed Cobra in Sabo's place, with Sabo finding out about them that way, it would explain why Vivi and Wapol may have found out too. But going back to that number 16, it is also curiously the number of times the Ox Bell is rung, the legendary bell from the Ox Lloyds, a ship from ancient times, which I wouldn't be surprised if it somehow ties into the lore of the Void Century somehow. The 16 ringings were said to be done at the beginning of the year, with 8 times being to thank the old year and 8 to welcome the new one. However, that's an oddly specific number, isn't it? And we need to ask ourselves why the number 16 keeps popping up in so many places. But if you know Japanese, once again, the answer is so very obvious, because in Japanese, numbers can be read in a variety of ways, and specifically the number 16, or more specifically 1 and 6, can be read as both I and Mu. Or in other words, the number 16 can be read as Imu, in reference to the king of the world. As such, celestial dragons use 16 bullets for their executions, in the same way that Imu-sama uses 16 bullets to execute its targets and erase entire islands from history. The assassin who became god could refer to Imu-sama directly, someone who murdered men in their path to attain such a position, and how Doflamingo wished to do the same. Many have jumped to the conclusion that in doing so, Imu-sama is making use of the ancient weapon Uranus in the past, yours truly included, but the thing is that if Imu represents the Earth, then it could not possibly be the deity Uranus, but rather the god of the Earth. But it would make sense that if the three ancient weapons were named after the gods that compose the final tree of planets of the solar system, then the other gods named after the remaining planets could also potentially host similar powers, which might explain why Imu had power that is equatable to one of the ancient weapons, capable of destroying the world. But how deeply do those powers go? If Imu-sama is the god, or rather goddess of the earth, Mother Nature, does that relate to their powers? Could them being the Mother of Nature tie into why they're always seen in the Chamber of Flowers in Marie-Joie, adored by nature, the flowers, and the butterflies? I mean, think about it, could them being the god of the earth be the reason how several islands made of earth came together to form the supercontinent Pangea, known as the Red Line, and why Marie-Joie's castle is called Pangea in turn, especially as this earthly continent seems to encase, or rather hide away from the world, the Sun Tree Eve, whose roots stretch all the way to Fishman Island beneath the Red Line, which, given its name and its connection to the people of the God Country, could very well be the original tree where the devil fruits first grew, which would explain why Imu-sama would want to hide it away, as the Mother of Nature Umi detested the devil fruits, and as such would want to get rid of, or at least hide away, the tree where they grew. Or what if we're actually looking at this the wrong way and it's the complete opposite? To hide the tree away from others, to hoard it for themselves. In fact, could it be that what the Don Quixote family meant when they said that if Doflamingo became king of the sea, he could show them their dreams? Because Imu-sama, the devil of the sea, is the one that showed people their dreams under the form of the devil fruits. What if the reason that devil fruits are weak to water is not just because Umi hates them, but because Umi wanted to make sure that no fruit user could ever oppose her, and as such made them all naturally weak to her powers to ensure she'd remain king? But if so, would this actually mean that King Imu, the devil of the sea, is actually...
視聴者の皆様、今日は何も見なかった、何も知らなかった、ライブラリオボハーラ、そのチャンネルはもともとないではないか。